Hey guys, today we're talking bioweapons. We're specifically talking them because Dr. Li-Meng Yan, who's this cute Chinese virologist from Hong Kong who's basically defected, she's been saying, and then she was on Tucker last night, that basically she has evidence that not only was the virus undoubtedly constructed by the Chinese, which I think we pretty much, we anybody with their, who's been paying attention realizes that's the case, but that they deliberately released it as a bioweapon. There's a lot of reasons to do this, especially if they think they're not going to get caught, or especially if they think the United States doesn't have the political capital to respond, or really the rest of the world doesn't have the political capital to respond. That's scary. That's got a lot of implications. But I thought what I would do is I would talk about biological weapons, what they are, and the basically the philosophy of use. Because I think a lot of people do not understand what a biological weapon is for, and what it does. These are principles I'm talking about that are basically they extend particularly to basically like viral bioweapons, but you can usually most of these extend to other types of bioweapons. I'm going to say specifically like a bioweapon that's used as like a viral agent. Let's pretend the COVID was a viral agent, like you were being used as a bioweapon. This is what I'm talking about. There are other types of bioweapons. Not everything I'm going to say is necessarily going to apply, but most things will. And this is really, since this is the thing that the Chinese are being accused of at the moment, I figured that this was probably the best place to have the conversation, basically inform you. These things I'm saying do not necessarily and usually do not apply to chemical weapons or nuclear weapons. So those things get bundled together because, they're the weapons of mass destruction. But chemical weapons and nuclear weapons have a lot more in common than they have with each other than either one of those have with biological weapons. Biological weapons is a very much a different animal. It's the same. It can be the same scale of death and destruction, but it is it's a lot more. There's a lot more going on, and it's actually honestly the hardest to develop and deploy compared to any of these other weapons. So I'm going to first go over the reasons why we don't use them, why nobody uses them, and first I should probably mention who's developed them in the past, because biological warfare has been around since, people notice that, the enemy gets sick if they eat rotting meat. But in terms of like creating something in a lab, whether it's naturally occurring or synthetic or basically a mix of the both, because you usually cultivate it, because it's usually as natural as a GMO is, or you culture and you pick the virus with the best properties, and then you keep, you basically accelerate its development down the generations, and you try to keep it to have the properties that you want it to have, and that can be done naturally. It's done faster. Same reason why, they developed this in the Wuhan lab, and the question is not only was the coronavirus jumping from bat to bat, now it was jumping from bat to human, and now it was a version that would jump from bat to human that could jump from human to human. That's a huge amount of steps, which was just one of the signs that it was cultivated. It's not impossible; it was completely natural, but that's one of the signs that it was cultivated. So, but that's what I'm talking about. Modern in terms of basically literally the last 100 years, I would say, of basically using medical science to develop biological weapons. Excuse me. Who did it first? Well, I would say probably the first people of note were the Germans, of course. Germans during World War II, part of their diabolical evil Nazi research, they were looking into. Well, they were looking into nuclear weapons. They didn't get that far with that, unless you believe some conspiracies. They already had the chemical weapons, but they realized chemical weapons aren't really effective on a battlefield. And they were developing the biological weapons, and these were things like retaliation. This was the kind of thing you would drop on the United States and hopefully it would stay in one continent, basically. The world was a lot bigger back then because just there wasn't as much international travel. So they wanted this, and they, of course, they had their test subjects were basically their prisoners, part of the Holocaust, the nasty, nasty stuff, right? As far as we know, they never were able to implement it. I mean, we know it wasn't dropped on the United States. Well, at least we weren't told if it was. I think we would have known. Germans, being diabolical. Whatever. That got shut down. The Soviets captured a lot of that technology. In fact, I think there was rumors that they did do like testing on populations in Poland. I don't know. I haven't looked into that enough to confirm that or really know what the story is, but I don't think it's impossible. Plus, like a lot of the really shady research facilities were basically in deep in the mountains of Poland. It does match the bill, but that might just be also, why wouldn't they, right? Well, yeah, why wouldn't they? Are they evil enough to do that? Yes, but did they do it? I can't speak to that. I don't know. But it is something, you can look up on your own if you wanted to learn more. The second group that developed them and actually used them in a large amount was Unit 731 of the Japanese Empire. What Unit 731 did, if you haven't heard of them, they basically developed biological weapons, anthrax variants, chemical weapons, all basically the nastiest of nasty stuff. And then they used them on civilians in Manchuria. They killed hundreds of thousands of people. It's probably the single biggest war crime that was committed in World War II outside of the Holocaust, outside of Dachau, where the body count was higher for an individual. But in terms of just them just targeting indiscriminately civilians, this did happen. Unit 731 was disbanded. They were largely captured by the U.S. The Soviets, obviously having gone into Manchuria after declaring war in 1945 and basically taking parts of the territory and trying to put their influence on China and whatnot, they were very much aware of this. But the U.S., we kind of just ran into it. We had heard reports of it, but we didn't know what it was until we basically these people surrendered and we got a hold of their data. Now, the thing with Unit 731, where this is where the controversy is, not only is it something that the Japanese Empire covered up, they couldn't cover up what they did with the Bataan Death March and in the POW camps, and they couldn't cover up the rape of Nanking and stuff because there just were too many survivors and too many people around. Unit 731, there wasn't that many people who survived who they used their weapons on. And also, it's you got to remember, you're in rural China and Manchuria. You don't know what a biological weapon is. All you know is everybody's getting sick and dying and bleeding from their eyeballs. And it wasn't something that was well known. And the Japanese destroyed a lot of the evidence after the fact. But when the U.S. caught these guys, we didn't put them on trial. And the question is why? Why didn't we do this? Well, we didn't do this, and this is the logic. I'm not justifying it. But I'm saying we didn't do this because they basically agreed to work for the United States to develop essentially biological weapons so that they could be researched for countermeasures. The remnants of Unit 731 and the scientists and military officers who were involved with this moved to Maryland by the Army Chemical Corps. You can look at. It's a real place. It's actually like an hour and a half from my house. They all moved to that area, and they were moved in, and they basically got immunity, despite having committed an unbelievable atrocity against the Chinese. And the reason this was done was because the German tech and the Soviets researching on their own, who now had the German tech, they were ramping up research massively. Particularly early on because they didn't have an answer to the atomic bomb. They didn't know whether they were going to get the atomic bomb or not. In fact, they had to steal the plans for the atomic bomb. But the biological weapon stuff, Soviets very, very well, but just they very much developed plenty of that on their own. And now they also had the German research. That scared the shit out of the United States. That scared us enough where we were literally willing to turn a blind eye to these atrocities that these people committed in Japan, from Japan, against the Chinese, just to get their research and expertise so that we would have some sort of counter if biological weapons were used against us. Now, you can debate the morality of that and whatnot. It's definitely a discussion to be had, but that is what happened. And thanks to basically Unit 731 and the Japanese scientists, the U.S. got a much bigger head start, and we're much more prepared to deal with what the Soviets were doing because of that. So you can think that maybe wasn't worth the trade-off because justice needed to be had, but that's what we did. Later in years, you did have smaller countries developing their own biological weapons. Europeans looked into it, but they were more interested in the countermeasure stuff. The U.S. and basically the Soviets were the ones rushing the hardest. Later on, you had like Iraq. Saddam did have biological weapons, and he did have programs for biological weapons. But the problem is that biological weapons don't hold very well. They're expensive. They're difficult. They're difficult to keep. They're difficult to deploy. And he basically not that he had abandoned his biological weapons program by the early 2000s, but it was not nearly as prolific as his chemical weapons program. His chemical weapons program was much more effective. It was much easier to find qualified scientists to basically develop chemical weapons and variants of nerve gas and whatnot than a biological weapon. Because, biological weapons, it's tough because, you can, if you unleash a version on, say, the Kurds, and you're trying to test it, right? And it's not effective enough, well, then you may have just inoculated them completely to whatever you're doing next. So it was not as easy for them to use bioweapons in the manner what they were doing with chemical weapons, where they drop chemical weapons and they see what the effect was on the people they were targeting, and then they take some notes, and then they go home, and then they make adjustments, and they test the next set. Not to mention, chemical expertise is a lot easier to come by than bioweapon expertise. So, have other countries tried to develop them? Yes. Have they been successful? Well, the only other country that's basically on the forefront of this would be China. China, their biological stuff, their genetics research, their everything from cloning to virology, everything's for the greater Chinese party. It's very much weaponized, but there's a lot of arguments of why not to use them. Just because somebody has a biological weapons program, or I should say they're developing biological weapons, and they don't call it the biological weapons program. And they're usually doing that in most cases to develop counters to what's going on. The United States, we very much have developed biological weapons. Probably some of the nastiest stuff, nastier than we could ever imagine. But the reason why we've done this is because we've also developed countermeasures to these things. Basically, we're trying to figure out what the Soviets are doing, create what they're creating, and then figure out how to beat it. And the Russians are largely the same. I suspect that, for every biological weapon they made, they probably tried to really thought about it, and they're like, we probably need to make the counter to this, because if in the event this does get out, or we do need to use it, or the Americans use it on us, we need to be able to respond in a way that saves lives. But China doesn't look at things that way. They, to them, losing 1 million people isn't a big deal. To the Russians, despite what we think, their population is not unlimited, not bottomless. They feel it when if they lost 1 million people, they would feel it. China would not feel it. They wouldn't. Nothing would change in China. So, all right. Again, reasons not to use them. If you use a biological weapon, you are now in a state of total war. Nukes can be targeted. Chemical weapons can basically target areas. Biological weapons can target areas. But you can't contain how far that biological agent is going to spread. That is out of your control. Once you launch it, it's out of your control. A nuke, you could drop a tactical nuke on a specific target, or fire a nuclear weapon underwater or something, and blow up like a submarine, or target a specific formation of troops. There might be fallout. There might be other secondary effects, but it can be contained. Chemical weapons, that area you've used the chemical weapons, and everything downwind of that is screwed over. But you're not going to, fire a chemical weapon. So if you're the Russians, you're not going to fire a chemical weapon at Berlin and then worry about the after effects hitting Moscow. You're just worried about basically the Germans now firing their own chemical weapons at you. A biological weapon, you don't get that luxury. You launch that, particularly launch that in the modern world where there's travel everywhere. You use that somewhere, it will spread everywhere. It will be extremely difficult to contain this unless you contain it immediately, which we know the Chinese didn't do. Like in Wuhan, they actually deliberately spread it, and once it's everywhere, it's kind of impossible to quarantine it, because it's in so many places. There's almost no point in quarantining. So that would be a reason why you don't want to use it, because it basically, if you use it, it's total war, and the enemy is going to basically, if they find out that's you, they're going to respond in kind. And they may not respond with a biological weapon, but they're not going to care about destroying military objectives. They're just going to basically target your population centers and steamroll you until you capitulate, because you've used a biological weapon. You've already basically shown reckless disregard for human life, and the faster they can get you to capitulate, even if that means leveling massive civilian populated areas, it's going to be justified, at least in a tactical sense. So that's a good reason not to use biological weapons. Another reason, they often give away the origin of their development. For instance, we know the one that came from Wuhan is the Wuhan coronavirus, and we know that because its genesis is the horseshoe bat. And the horseshoe bat is not from Wuhan, but we know the first outbreak was in Wuhan, and we know the lab that was there working on coronavirus with the horseshoe bat was in Wuhan. So if there's any basically intelligence on this virus, you can trace it back usually to where the origin is. What do you want to say, this is a mistake that the Chinese made or not? But basically, it doesn't seem like they attempted to hide its origin. They did try to blame the U.S. and try to say, it was naturally occurring. Somebody ate a bat. It wasn't any of that. I mean, it came from this lab. and most of us, at least people who have been paying attention, we all know it's from this lab. Whether it was deliberately released or not, that's really the question, but we know what the origin was. And most bioweapons, particularly the less sophisticated they are, or I should say, in some cases, the more sophisticated they are, you can usually trace back, because there's only going to be so many people who can develop it, and there's only so many origins. Did you start from a pre-existing virus? Did you develop it directly synthetically? It does leave a trail of sorts. There's also a chance that you unleash your wonderful biological weapon upon the enemy, and the enemy is ahead of you, and they have a counter to it. And now basically your entire plan has fallen on its face. And even if they don't know you did it, they now have, basically a countermeasure. They have a vaccine or a treatment or something. And then why did you do what you did? You just caused them to basically rally and be more aware. So now you can't do this again. So there's that chance, and if you're trying to use this against a developed nation, you can't rule out basically human ingenuity. Somebody might come up with a counter, because as smart as your bioweapons guys are, odds are there is somebody smart enough in the other country to figure out how to counter what your guys have built. So that's another reason. Let's see. Odds are it's basically going to bite you in the ass, because it's going to spread in the modern era to your population in some manner. So if it's bad, it's a nasty weapon, you're going to be eating it, and you better be able to deal with it. And if you inoculate your own population, well, you've just given away the game. So it's not as easy to use. It's not just cut and dry, because if you use it and it's effective in spreading, it's going to spread to your population areas too, and that's something you have to be ready to deal with. And most countries are not willing to sacrifice their populations just to try to use a biological weapon against the enemy population, who's then going to probably retaliate, and then everybody else who's friends with them, including people who aren't that friendly with them, are also going to retaliate, because they have to basically stomp you out for setting the precedent. To set the precedent, basically, that we don't use biological weapons. So there's a lot of reasons not to use bioweapons. But there are reasons to use them. If it's hard to trace, if you create one that's hard to trace, and then you're able to use it, you basically for free get to disrupt the enemy's economy, their military readiness, their morale, their social cohesion. That's all sound familiar? You get to cause massive chaos and damage to them in a way that you could simply not do by declaring war. You declare war on them, basically, you say, "Oh, we're gonna bomb Pearl Harbor, or whatever, bomb Pearl Harbor." What happens? Their economy, whatever problems they were having, suddenly kind of start to evaporate, because everybody now is working towards basically ramping up their manufacturing, and everybody's going to work to go to war. People will look past whatever the issues they have socially. It would have been like, basically the South and the North were about to go to civil war, right? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like Spain shows up and attacks the United States. I think the Civil War would be on hold while everybody dealt with that, basically. And it's the same kind of deal where basically you end up creating social cohesion by giving them a common enemy. But if it's not detectable, or it's confusing, you get to basically get the full maximum effect of this bioweapon in terms of the not the death count, but in terms of like the economic damage, the military readiness damage, the morale, the social cohesion. The benefits are incredible, and it's something that basically only a biological weapon can do, or a naturally occurring virus that happens to have the properties of a biological weapon in terms of how it spreads. Which is not impossible. I mean, there was the Spanish flu, there was the the Black Plague. Like these, you could argue that it's got all the same properties of a biological weapon. It's just that we know it wasn't developed in a lab because nobody was around to develop it in a lab. If you use it in a manner in which the lethality is low, we're talking like less than 2%. Which is this one is, which is why I think there's a pretty good case for saying it actually is a deliberate weapon. It causes utter confusion. Everybody's confused because it's really easy to tell a population when 60% of the people get sick and die, and people start shooting blood out of their eyeballs, and choke to death within like 20 minutes of catching it or something like that. Like if it's like something really nasty, it's really easy to say. These guys did that. They created this in a lab, and that was just to basically kill people. But if it's something where it's really not that lethal, where it has all the fear and all the spreading, and you get all the benefits of basically disrupting the enemy's economy and social cohesion, but it's not something that is so horrific and so deadly that everybody basically is geared up to go to war, where it basically creates social cohesion, because then there's no arguments about it. It's just everybody's in the same boat because the lethality is so high. You basically, if you have it where the lethality is low enough, you just create confusion, and you create further political unrest in the nation you're targeting, or the population you're targeting, or really the world. You're creating basically economic unrest. So, if you're going to use one, there's an argument basically like, well, you just don't use one that's super nasty. You just kind of have these pandemics pop up every once in a while just to make sure that they do economic damage to. Basically, if you think it's going to disrupt the enemy's economy more than your economy, and you guys aren't officially in a hot war, there's some benefits to doing that. Now, I think we're going to come out on top. So I think the Chinese have made a miscalculation if they did indeed do this deliberately. But that doesn't stop, somebody from think tanking it and deciding like, how this is actually a viable strategy to do something like this. Now, that's kind of the big state reasons. Now, why would a small stateless enemy, basically a sub-faction of a grander political order or terrorist organization, why would they use one? Well, there's no reason they wouldn't. It's actually really, it's the holy grail of, with the exception of probably, like a hydrogen bomb where you can make like a huge statement. It really is the holy grail of weapons you can use against mass swaths of an enemy population. Particularly if you're not worried about, if you're like a radical jihadist and you're not worried about, casualties on your side because this is for some, grander order, right? Bioweapons are, it sounds like the perfect weapon, all right? If you have it, if they have it, they will use it, period. Because there's no reason not to. Because, you're targeted, what are they going to do? Like, nuke you? Like, there's you're a sub-organization within another country that's multinational. You're kind of the perfect scapegoat to use something like that. So you would use it. Now, the reason why they don't is not because lack of trying. It's because it's actually a lot more difficult than people give it credit. Stealing one is not easy. Not only basically, if somebody steals a biological weapon from the Russians or the Chinese or from the United States, right? They go to everyone, including their enemies, and say, this just happened. We might not give you the details, but someone just basically, everybody's going to be hunting for you, friend and foe of the people you're trying to attack with it, or I should say, the people you stole it from. And particularly if they figure out that who you are and who your enemies are, or who you hate, those people are going to be looking for you. You think the Bin Laden manhunt was something. Wait till if somebody actually gets a hold of an actual proper bioweapon. There's not going to be any borders or waiting 10 months of planning. Like they're just going to basically move heaven and earth to find you and stop you. So there's that risk. And that's assuming you can steal it, because the other option is basically develop it. And the talent and facilities you would need and personnel and resources to develop a biological weapon is not something you can just buy. It's not something you can, in a cave learn how to do. Like, you could learn how to make nerve gas in Pakistan or just in like a third world country and train people and build pretty crude facilities because, you're basically, you only really need World War I style tech to really, I would say, safely, effectively, bottle it and deliver it and create it. But a biological weapon, there's much more involved. It would be like the idea of like Al Qaeda building a nuclear reactor and a centrifuge like in a cave somewhere. You think, oh, that's ridiculous. How could that happen? Well, a bioweapon, it's much the same in terms of sophistication, if not more, because there's less information publicly about how to do this sort of thing. So it's tough. You can't transport it. You can't deliver it. You can't as easily. You have probably a higher chance of accidentally unleashing it on yourself before you even deliver it anywhere. Also, it might not be potent. Again, basically countries like the Soviet Union and the United States were developing things that and developing counters to things. And like, what makes you think that you as a third-party terrorist organization developing something out of nowhere is not going to make something that basically the people you're trying to kill don't already have a counter to? So it's basically big reward if you can manage to release it and use it. But the odds of getting that done are very, very low. It's not that the threat doesn't exist. The worry is essentially a rogue state develops it, and then the rogue state collapses, and then it falls into the hands of some terrorist organization, or Iran develops some sort of bioweapon, and they just hand it off to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah goes and delivers it. Right? That's much harder to do than you'd think, but that is a threat. In China's case, see, this is where the argument that essentially that there's already enough evidence already that they've effectively treated this like a biological attack regardless of whether they deliberately released it in the first place or not. Let me put it this way: if you were China and you were basically, this was the best thing you had, and you needed it to be released timely. Basically, you said, I need basically COVID-19, basically end of 2019, 2020 to be completely fucked up because we want to achieve certain political ends. We want to have a better negotiating hand with the Americans because we want to crush their economy so that they can, so that they have to negotiate a better trade deal with us, right? You would and you were pushing something out the door. This is probably what how you would go about it. You release it in Wuhan because, again, you don't care about your own people. It's they're just numbers. You quarantine Wuhan. You basically kill people and weld them into their apartments and basically make sure it does not spread to the rest of China, while spreading it internationally everywhere you possibly can. Then you take your control of you basically lie about it. You buy all the PPE up from all these different countries that you don't like, so that they're basically, one, dependent on you for the PPE. Two, it makes sure that basically early on it spreads as far and as fast as possible because nobody has PPE to contain it, which is something they did. They lied about it for as long as they did. But had they pulled strings at the WHO to pretend like it wasn't transmittable when they damn well knew it was transmittable, person to person. They've done everything as if basically they were trying to utilize a biological weapon. Now, did they kill probably 1 million of their own people? Yeah, probably. If you look at their cell phone records, basically, millions of users suddenly dropped off, and China's we only had 6,000 deaths. Yeah, bullshit. They probably lost 1 million people, judging by basically the electronic records, and we're never going to know because they're not taking a body count tally at the Uyghur concentration camps. They're sure as hell not going to take it in a place like Wuhan where they can be embarrassed, because even if it wasn't deliberate, they still have their pride on the line, so they're not going to tell the truth about what's going on. Is there much different? But my point being, is there really much different that they would have done than what they did had they released it deliberately? No, and that's the scary part. And part of it is just because the CCP is just that awful. Basically, if this was going to happen, they immediately were going to spring on it and exploit it. So if it happened accidentally, they were going to do this. If they did it deliberately, well, they were going to do this. This was probably the way they were going to do it anyway. So we may never know. This Dr. Li-Meng Yan, she might have evidence showing that they released this deliberately. We're going to enter a whole new world if that's proven. So this is one of the more important stories that's kind of brewing under the radar. I wish people would stop, trying to blame the president and doing all this, like just complaining and screeching and acting like 200,000 people are dead when they're counting motorcycle injuries and stuff as COVID deaths. They really need to focus on where this came from, China. There's a reason the president has been calling it the China virus, because that's where your eyes need to be, because they may have done this deliberately. And if they've done this deliberately, this is a crisis for the entire world. If we can prove it, that'll be great. It'll be scary, but it'll be great. And also, actually, it'll help us with, the Russians are not going to tolerate that. The Russians very much understand biological warfare. They're not going to tolerate the use of biological weapons, even against the United States, by the Chinese, because that sets a really deadly precedent. And that'll push Russia into our corner. It'll push the Europeans will have to no longer turn a blind eye to what the Chinese have been doing. It's a major. This will be a major paradigm shift if this is proven, and if it's proven and it's not politicized immediately, because the media will run cover for the Chinese. They absolutely will. They don't want a war with China. They don't want to fight. They don't want China to take blame for something they can blame on the president. They don't care about China. China basically pays their bills. They care about basically the amount of power and control and influence they have in the United States. And in this case, Dr. Li-Meng Yan proving that the Chinese deliberately did this to us as a planet, as a civilization, even, that doesn't help their narrative. That doesn't help them further their goals, because now it points the finger at China. It basically their breadwinner is the people who are paying them now are in the hot zone. For instance, like the NBA. Like if this ends up being true, the NBA, they're done. They're done. They're going to have to completely reorganize, because all their Chinese ties, everybody from Nike, who's building the shoes over there, to their advertisers, to their to LeBron James, all these other people who just are basically kissing China's ass. It's over. It's they find out it's a biological weapon. Basically, Congress, even this Democrat Congress, is going to pass a law basically saying, nope, we don't do dealings with China until they pay us back basically a certain amount of money per life, a certain amount of money per economic damage. That's what's going to happen. And you can kiss your your lucrative NBA Chinese stuff goodbye, because it's what else do you do in response to that? You can't allow people to collude with somebody, a country that did this to not just us, but the rest of the planet as well. But that's the thing. There's a lot of people who stand to lose a shitload of money if this is true. So this Dr. Li-Meng Yan, I hope she has a bodyguard. I hope she's watching her back at all times, because not just the CCP wants her dead, because she's shit talking them and she's the defector. Lots of people have a lot of money invested in China, and they would prefer, whether this was true or not, they're basically saying, well, the economic damage of cutting off China would be so much worse than just these handful of people who died, and they'll want to cover it up. So I'm going to be watching it very closely. We may know the truth, but whether we know the truth and it's actionable is really the question, because we know the truth for a lot of different things. For instance, we know the truth for the Ukraine thing, that basically nothing happened, and that the president was fine, and the Russia collusion stuff, that none of that, we know the truth for that. And that basically the Trump administration was spied on by our own agencies. It had nothing, Russia, that was secondary. Like they weren't involved with the Trump campaign at all. These are things we know to be true, but good luck telling that. So some people don't accept that as true. So in this case, basically expect an unbelievable level of interference, where if she comes out and she proves that basically the Chinese did this, there's going to be an unbelievable amount of forces out there pushing back as hard as possible, from basically CCP stooges to people who have money invested, to people who are just politically brain dead, who just Orange Man's bad. What do you mean? How can you blame China? It's Orange Man. They're going to all be pushing back really, really hard to try to basically cover this up. Maybe it's possible, basically, the Democrats pull their head out of their ass, and if this comes out true, and they say, okay, all right, Orange Man, truce, we got to deal with China. Maybe that's possible. That's kind of what happened, during World War II. The Republicans hated FDR, and pretty much Japanese bombed us at Pearl Harbor, and it was like, all right, well, truce. We know you're kind of a socialist piece of shit, and you're doing all these things that are extending out the Great Depression, and you're trying to stack the Supreme Court and shit, and we really don't like it, but we've got other enemies to deal with. So let's we're not gonna deny you the ability to basically respond to what's going on, because we don't like you politically. Maybe that'll happen, but I kind of doubt it, because again, this lady should be on every single show. Cable TV show. She should be on every podcast she can get out to. She should be as high profile as possible, all while watching her back to get her message out. And the only people who have covered her is Tucker. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign at all. So, I hope, I pray she brings her basically her information, and it works out. And we find out the truth, and actions taken, and even if it's inconclusive, at least I want to have the information so that we can further know what we're up against. But hell of a thing to be occurring during an election year. I mean, honestly, God, if you're China, this was an absolutely brilliant time. If they did plan this was the year to do it. This was absolutely the year to do it. For in terms of damaging the United States, this was the year to do it. So, but again, just because the stars have aligned and everything, this was all perfect, and it seems like it was engineered, doesn't mean it was. It still doesn't mean it was, but we need to really think about this, because this can be, this is a whole other world we're entering. If this ends up being true, if this is something China actually did, this is because even if China did it, and then we don't react, and maybe Trump loses the election somehow, and then Biden's in charge, and things go back to normal, and China gets their trade deal, and now they're not mad anymore, and they go back to ripping us off. We live in that world now, where someone was able to do that to us and do that to the rest of the planet and walk away with it. That's not a world I want to live in. That's a hell of a lot less safe than it is here. Which is why I suspect if she comes out with proper evidence, and it gets the exposure it needs, and they are able to prove this, hopefully the international community will step up and be like, okay, we can't set this precedent where this is something that's not okay for it to occur. This is because this is worse than Russia taking Crimea or them building islands in the South China Sea. This is by far worse than that, because this means that basically you've greenlighted biological weapon warfare. You've greenlighted biological total war against the whole world for your own ends. That's they're going to look, people who don't like us are going to look at us, and they're going to say, we can't allow this to stand because we really don't want the Americans to do this. And then, the Russians are looking at us probably thinking that too. And then we're going to be looking at the Russians saying, well, we can't allow the Chinese to do this because now the Russians are going to be thinking to do this. So it kind of puts everybody in the same boat. I'm sure Iran will just not believe, Iran, don't expect them to be joining a coalition. But everybody else who's got, strategic issues with each other, if this ends up being the case, basically anybody who wasn't in on it, who's not just like completely, brain dead like Iran is, we're going to have to basically team up and figure out what we need to do about this. Will it be military action? Probably not. Will it be economic action? Absolutely. Will economic action possibly lead to military retaliation by the Chinese? Absolutely, that could happen. Today is not the same as yesterday. When this lady comes forward with her information, if it is what she says it is, everything changes. Everything changes. The world you live in is very different, and we'll have to see how we deal with it. Because the U.S. is going to lead on this. We're going to be the ones who decide whether basically China's punished or not. Europe can't do it on their own. The Europeans and the Russians could punish China, and the Chinese would just shrug their shoulders. That we have to be a part of it, and the rest of the world's going to be looking at us because it was intended for us, how we react. And if we blink, that's going to invite all kinds of trouble. So, all right, here's to Dr. Li-Meng Yan, to her health, and man, I just I'm looking at somebody who I know there's people trying to kill her, and it's kind of eerie to look and be like, yeah, that's whatever. Don't if a New York prison cell decides they said they can protect you, don't listen to them. Man, I don't know. I hope DHS or somebody is one of the agencies is keeping track of her. But at the same time, the Chinese probably have moles within our own agencies, so maybe that might not even be the safest way. I don't know. Hey, look, if I know this video is not going to reach that many people, but if you're, if you run into this lady, freaking offer to help her. If she's got to sleep in a different bed every night, then, offer her yours, because people are trying to hurt her. And anything we can do to basically keep her alive so that we can, get her information, and she can, get her word out. That's really our duty. Oh man. All right. Well, we'll find out.